The boys are back on That's a Tap with a huge breaking news episode, emergency show. We just dropped our weekly roundup yesterday, but we were a day too late because today, man, is the combat sports world on fire, DJ.
Man, absolutely. Like the MMA world is on fire at the moment. Like there's been
Mm.
updates left, right, and center. We woke up and there was so many updates from the PFL, Francis Ngannou, the UFC. Dropping some bombshells and some great cards. So much to talk about. Yeah, like we also do quick turnarounds, not just Gilbert Burns, right? We do quick turnarounds too. So here we are with the second episode, one day out. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, so we had we'll start with the news of Francis Ngannou finally coming to terms on a league, professional
Yeah,
fighters league. You've been all over it, DJ. You were the
yeah,
first one to tell us and the viewers that you thought this
yeah,
would happen. Take it
yeah.
away.
Man, huge news. Extremely excited for Francis Ngannou. Since leaving the UFC, there was a lot of chatter, a lot of talk, a lot of questions. A lot of things were up in the air. A lot of other promoters coming out and sort of, further painting a gloomier picture for Francis Ngannou. But I mean, I think we stuck to our guns and we said, look, there's a heavy indication he will go to the PFL. PFL have shown keen interest too, and they probably were the only ones who didn't sort of come out and try and slander Francis Ngannou, and that and then Jake Paul obviously talking a lot about him coming into the PFL as well. And now it's all out in the air; it's official. I believe he's signed up into one of the greatest deals ever offered to an MMA fighter. So Francis Ngannou has officially signed with the PFL, and he will be fighting in the pay-per-view special division that they've just started. Not only that, he obviously gets a seat at the table, right? He gets to sit with the big boys, the decision makers, and he's been given the role of chairman, I believe, for the PFL Africa division, which is huge. And look, if they're able to pull that off before the UFC, because there is a lot, been said on the UFC Africa topic, and Dana White saying that that's one of his, ultimate passions to have a great, fight card there. This might even expedite that process, right? You might see that process happen quicker. But obviously now with Francis Ngannou at the head of that division, we could see a lot of things happening in Africa from the PFL side. In addition to that, man, I think this is the best thing sort of we've heard like in a very long time, which is look, we've seen instances where we've had fighters look after each other, and then Francis Ngannou has been very vocal about, making sure that not just him but his opponents and everyone in the organization is looked after. And a key nugget that we got from him is that he obviously didn't disclose his purse, other than saying it's one of the best he's ever had. You could only expect it in the double digits, even, man. You never know, right? But he's also guaranteeing 2 million at least for his opponents every time they fight,
Oh,
right? And that's huge, right? 2 million
huge,
is sometimes like pay-per-view money for some of these UFC champions,
man.
right? So it's just unheard of. This is going to cause a huge drift in terms of it'll be more of an eye
Yeah.
opener for a lot of fighters, and there'll be a lot more because I mean there was a lot of parties, or there were parties who were very invested in wanting to see Francis Ngannou fail, right? Because the message that would send is, you can't burn big organizations and go and find success. So for the likes of like grassroots fighters who are not making too much money, this is an inspiration. This is a great example. Say it's hold, stand your ground, and then obviously, success will follow, and then him
Yeah.
succeeding bodes well for his fellow fighters and others in the organization who want to test what's out there, right? This is a prime example. I'm keen to see how this all pans out. There's a
Yeah.
lot of questions, obviously, like, where does PFL get all this money, right? What is their operating model? Like, how do they generate so much revenue to be able to support these kind of decisions, right? And, obviously, time will tell. They've made some big signs, sign ups. They've got Jake Paul in there. right? A massive superstar. Imagine the numbers they'll do when we've got Jake Paul in there.
Oh yeah.
We've got Francis Ngannou, another massive superstar, whether anyone likes it or not, right? And people are going to tune in to watch, right? Uh, Interesting fact though is that he will not be fighting for the PFL till next year.
Yep.
He is going to be solely focusing on boxing bouts this year, and PFL will not be doing those. Right, that'll
Mm.
be either different promotions or self-promoted by Francis. But what the key thing here is that he's secured something now, right? He's there with another key organization, and man, PFL's building a little bit of a fortress there, right? Like there are rumors that PFL's about to buy out Bellator, right?
Yep.
Slowly but surely they are rising to be, that tough competitor for UFC. Like UFC has been sort
Mm.
of, they've been leading the charge for a very long time, and for the most part of it, there's no one to really challenge them. Like the quality of the cards are
Yep.
there and still is.
Exactly.
And what we see is the depth of their rosters for the other organizations don't allow them to, or the notoriety of fighters, like the lack of notorious fighters in their organizations, uh, you know, makes them like impossible to compete with the UFC. But now with PFL doing all these moves, signing up these superstars, and there's some great fighters in Bellator as well. And if they do end up taking that on, they're looking at launching a solid challenge to the UFC, and we know
Mm.
what that means, right? Great challenges make, they just make each other better, right? So they will see the UFC and the PFL continuously competing to put the best content out there, and guess who the winners are? Us, right? The fans.
Facts.
We stand to get the best fighting the best, and we stand to get some of the best events out there. So we're fingers crossed.
Yeah, most definitely. And great thoughts on that. But I want to ask you, what are your personal thoughts towards him not in the deal, Francis not fighting in MMA this year at all? And what do you
Yep.
think? Do you think we can expect a boxing announcement then because of that soon?
Yep. Yeah, spot on. I think we're gonna be expecting some boxing announcements soon as well. I think,
Yep.
look, take a look at what has happened so far, right? There was a lot going on. The one championship president coming in, saying things about Francis Ngannou, the BKFC president. We've had the UFC, and
Yep.
Dana White, carry their narrative as well. Francis Ngannou had the opportunity to come out and sort of defend himself and sort of give his side of or give his account of things, which he sort of didn't do, which is an indication that he was working in the background to get all these things set up. So when he does come out and speak to someone, now it's just going to be, the ball's going to be moving. It'll just keep moving now, right? There's no more hiatus. There's no more, roadblocks, right? So he's now announced a PFL move, and he said that's next year. Okay, this year I would be very surprised if he already doesn't have boxing bouts lined up, and I think he'll give it a little bit of time for this to settle down a
Yep.
bit, and then he'll
Agree.
hit us with the boxing announcement too. Because I don't think he would have come out if he didn't have something ready to go. And let's also not forget, like,
Yeah.
we talk about time flying, right? We're like 6 months into the year, man. Like, we're 6 months before the year
Don't
ends, and
remind me.
we're back into the new year. Yeah. So I think we'll at least see him fight once in boxing this year, right?
Yep.
And I feel like he'll do it against a big name, because it could very well be a one and done, right? Like, depending on how it goes. Like, let's say he fights someone like a Wilder, and it's a first round knockout, right? And if he's in the receiving end of it, odds are he's not going to entertain boxing again, because that's going to impact his, his sort of
Is
star power in boxing.
just related to that, there's talk, and we touched on in the weekly roundup, DJ, about the mega boxing exhibition showcase in
Yeah,
Saudi Arabia. How does this sound? First fight, Francis Ngannou, first fight in boxing versus Andy the Destroyer Ruiz. Second
yeah,
fight, Anthony Joshua versus the Bronze Bomber, Deontay Wilder. And
yeah.
then the main event, Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk.
Man, that's music to my ears, especially the core main and the main. You know how much I desperately want the Usyk Fury fight to happen. I really do, man. There's not a day that goes by that I don't pray to the combat gods to bless us with that event, that fight. Man, Joshua Wilder would be a icing on top. The only change I'd make there, CT, is Francis Ngannou to take on someone like a King Kong Ortiz. You know what I mean? like Andy Ruiz is good, right? Like he's really good. He's one of those um, heavyweights you find in the upper end of that division. Francis Ngannou's new to boxing,
Right.
and yes, he's been training boxing and all that, but
Yep.
he's an MMA fighter, right? I'd like to
True.
see him maybe. Look, King Kong Ortiz as the name value, right? But he's also on the older side, and obviously, sort of,
True.
kind of plays into Francis Ngannou's strengths, right? Same explosive fighter, like looking for that one punch knockout. So I like that, right? And maybe Andy Ruiz can fight. Not anymore Zhang Zhang because he's now rematching George Joyce. At least the rematch clause was activated. So, but
Yeah,
Dillian White,
Zhang.
maybe
We are hearing that Tyson Fury's possible opponent is Zhang.
Zhang, yeah. But I also heard that George Joyce has activated the rematch clause.
Oh
Yeah, yeah.
man,
So
no
we'd
one's
probably,
no one's
yeah,
trying to see that.
yeah. It wasn't. I mean, the way the first fight went, like, we don't think there's anything to see in the second one. But hey, man, boxing,
um,
combat,
but
it's always a
another
surprise.
question, sorry for you, is that the deal? Is there any news on the term, the length of this deal?
No, nothing yet so far. No, not that I could see or find what's available. And I know he's done an interview
Yeah,
since. I haven't had an opportunity to see that yet either, which I will before
I'd
the end of
assume it's
today.
a
But
given the fact that it took them a while to reach this deal. I would think PFL would want to
hold on.
extend him as long as possible.
Absolutely, and then if he's definitely taking on ventures such as being the general manager or uh, you know lead for PFL Africa, you're looking at someone who's going to invest long term, right? You don't get people coming in and taking roles such as that where you get to launch such a big initiative in a country which is so talent rich and hasn't been exploited yet, right? As you won't it'll be very unusual if it's a short-term venture. So I'm expecting Francis Ngannou to drop anchor and
Yeah,
stay on, even post his fighting
yeah,
career.
facts.
Yeah, so that's my expectation. That's all. So yeah,
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, exciting times. Glad for Francis. My thoughts. I'm happy for
yes,
him. He
absolutely.
got this is a classic case, and maybe the first guy pioneer to hold out, get what he really wants, and all the best to him. And yeah, fight
Yep,
fans just want to see Francis fight. You know, he's just such a generational, unique fighter. Boxing world, he's got a lot to offer.
yep.
MMA, hopefully, yeah, he's got a lot more to offer. I'm excited
Hey,
for that, for
hey.
more
Here's the thing.
news.
Let
Yep.
me let me let me leave you with this thought as well, right? To just close off this Francis Ngannou chapter or topic. Right now, the fight that we all wanted to see in the UFC, right? Not just you and me, CT. Every
Yep.
single person who calls an MMA fan, casual or hardcore, was the John Jones Francis Ngannou. Right now, since
Absolutely.
Francis Ngannou exited, there was we pretty much gave up on the thing. Oh, we're never going to see that fight. Hear me out. November, John
Yep.
Jones fights Stipe, arguably beats him, retires, as he's indicating, right? Because he's like, I don't have any other challenge. The only challenge I'll entertain is Francis Ngannou. But Francis Ngannou is not coming to the UFC. I'll guarantee
Yeah.
you that,
No.
right?
No.
John Jones retires, right? And guess what?
Oh.
PFL is known for doing some short-term deals. John Jones does a one and done deal with the PFL to fight Francis Ngannou in their cage. So hey, look,
Ooh.
you cannot rule that out. There's still a possibility that John Jones and Francis
Hmm.
Ngannou might happen next year. Because Francis Ngannou is not fighting in the PFL till next year. That's a lot of time, unless
Yeah.
the UFC, which look seems like they're doing like they've done and doing everything they can to sort of make it difficult for Francis Ngannou to thrive, right? Including all the shock announcements, like the talk about the timing of it, right? Just hours or minutes after Francis Ngannou announces this, and he obviously made a Instagram post saying that there's news coming on the 17th, Twitter and everywhere, 17th of May. And then obviously seems like clockwork. UFC drops some really, and Dana White drops some really, really big news as well. Albeit
Yep.
maybe to try and take the shine off this. But like I think both news were great news. But yeah,
Yep.
man, don't rule out the John Jones, Francis Ngannou fight yet, unless the UFC obviously tries to roadblock it with contractual clauses. I mean, it could
I
still happen.
like it. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I like that. Yeah, more news to come on that. And then next up, we're going to address the huge UFC announcement. But first, was that perfect timing? Was it coincidental, DJ?
I mean, look, hey, I'm gonna just say it. I think it was on purpose, right? Like, I mean, it just. Hey, look. Also, like all these fight news, right? If you look at the number of fights that got announced, it's not something you can get it done in a couple of days, right? So these fights have been sitting there, right? And these offers would have been made a while ago, and
Facts.
these have been worked on. But I think
Yep.
it was a strategic decision to sort of release that today to try and take off some of that shine off Francis Ngannou. I don't think that worked. I think people are still talking about Francis Ngannou, but I also think people are talking about the UFC event as well. I'm super hyped up, man. I'm super hyped up for the month
Oh,
of July. We're getting two fantastic cards,
yep.
within a span of 4 weeks, and it's just nothing short of amazing. The one thing I'd probably like to know more about
Yeah.
is have these fighters signed these fights, right?
Yeah.
We know that sometimes in order to make an announcement, the UFC sometimes announces fights that haven't yet been signed. Robert Whitaker, Paulo Costa was a perfect example of that. Obviously, to create that hype for that card, that fight was put as part of that. Offers
Yep.
were made, but obviously Costa hadn't signed it by then, right? But it
Yeah.
was still
Yeah.
released. That news was released. So I'll be curious to know if all these fighters have signed their bout agreements. But
Agree.
provided they have, right, it is a UFC 291 is looking like a banger of an event. It does also look like they put it together. Like, I mean, we rarely see the UFC create a pay per view unless it has a massive superstar at the top of it, a non-title event. I know the BMF title is on, but look, man, like let's be honest, this is it's a non-title main
Mm.
event. So there could be arguments made that Kamaru Usman took the BMF from George Masvidal, and then Leon Edwards beating Kamaru took that from him, right? So I don't know. I really don't know the concept behind this BMF title, but um, to put a non-championship main event means they've tried. They've tried to put a championship main event. I would like to think maybe it would have been the John Jones Stipe one, because remember originally it was planned for July, right?
Yep.
And obviously, unfortunately, didn't work out. So it's probably a hell of a fight, banger of a fight, right? And perfect timing to sort of kind of with that Abu Dhabi card coming up in October. But
With
hey,
that.
let's talk about the announcement. CT UFC 291. Let's start with
Yep.
that. What out of there was a long list of fights that got announced in this Salt Lake, Utah card, right? And Salt Lake, Utah is known for its iconic head kick KO, pound for pound, headshot dead, right? So tell me what you're most excited for out of this whole card. What's the fight that excites you the most?
Look, when I first saw it, probably given the fact we've seen Gaethje, we've seen Poirier before, my eyes were drawn to the co-main. You know, what are they drumming up? And Yan versus Pereira's first foray to the 205. I think he's got big things ahead of him in that division. Really looking forward to him. You know,
Yeah.
see if he can then recover after that. You know, being brutally knocked out by Izzy. But then, you know, we know Izzy might have plans to want to move up. So that's the first chapter of a long line of storylines for 205 with Pereira. What about you?
Absolutely, man. Like, I mean, I agree with you on this. The fight that excites me the most
Mm.
out of this whole card is the Blachowicz Alex Pereira one.
Oh,
I love the main event. Justin Poirier, Justin Gaethje too. If you saw the
yep,
first one, that was violence personified. Obviously, it was a stoppage win for Dustin, but man, they were both like going at each other. They were both spent by the end of that stoppage. And I'm excited to see how this goes now. Like, they're both grown heaps and bounds. They've both shown championship caliber. They're both challenged for the undisputed championship. They've both held
yep,
interim titles, and now they're going to fight to see who out of them two will challenge for the title. A lot of implications in this fight, man. Like, I would say, both Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje have had two shots each at the title. Right? Am I correct in saying that? Yes, two shots each.
yep,
And I would like to think whoever loses this fight that's it for them in terms of title aspirations, right?
Yeah.
And Gaethje's
Agree.
already gone out and said, I've only got a couple left in me, right?
Yeah.
And same with Poirier as well, right? Unless he entertains some exhibition fights, not exhibition, sorry, more like star value fights. Um, but yeah, great main event for me. The core main, it's just intriguing, right? It's just this is why UFC is brilliant, right? The way they think,
Facts.
it's not just you know putting together fights. It's about the thought process behind it. It's sort of storylines that they weave into it, right? Let's look at this. Jan Blachowicz is one of the only ones to beat Israel Adesanya in the UFC outside of Alex Pereira, right? Because remember when Easy went up to 205 and they obviously suffered a decision loss. So if Pereira
Yep.
is able to beat the only guy who beat Israel Adesanya in the UFC, that kind of gives him more bragging rights and kind of fuels that storyline more. Let's just say he fights this guaranteed, right? If he beats Blachowicz, he fights for the title next. After Yuri and Jamal Hill
Yeah.
do business, right? We can guarantee that Pereira will fight for the title. Let's just say everything lines up and he takes the title. I can guarantee you the UFC by that time Adesanya would have had like about I don't know 3 or 4. Given the rate he's going in, man, 4 or 5 title defenses, right? And then he'll be like, you know what, double champ status again, and he'll do it right this time. He'll get that weight put on properly, and I reckon, man, like it'll be. Could you imagine if it lines up again and that the trilogy fight is for a second
Ooh.
belt
Yeah.
for the superstar Israel Adesanya, and then
It's
for Alex
happening.
Pereira, it's like it's just crazy. Like a lot of implications there as well. I love it. I like the Tony Ferguson fight. Like I think for once
Yep. Yeah. A beatable
we got
opponent.
yeah, like he's got like a it's kind of like two veterans, right? Like I think Tony Ferguson. I don't think I'm wrong in saying maybe the title run days are past for Tony Ferguson, right? And I think this is more like an entertainment factor fight. So I think what Tony Ferguson needs is some motivation, some uh, a boost in his morale, right? And this fight, if he's able to beat Bobby Green, will give him that, right? So I think it's a balanced matchup. Bobby Green is no joke, man. So it's a well balanced matchup, though, right? And then here's the fight that intrigued me the most. Paulo Costa versus Ikram Aliskerov,
Oh,
right?
thoughts.
The Russian is Ikram Aliskerov. Now,
Yep.
I was expecting the Paulo Costa versus Hamza Chimaev fight to be announced, right? Not today with Dana White just going live and all that, but I was just thinking, oh, that's what's next for
Yeah.
Paulo Costa.
Could be a
They're
hold
gonna they're
up.
gonna do that. Yeah, they're gonna do that in Abu Dhabi, because if you look at it, Hamzat has been iced since last September, which is concerning because you got someone in their prime with a lot of star power, right? You can if you exploit it right, like he'll be like doing Conor McGregor numbers, right? And it's very
I think
unfortunate that
there's
he's been
some health
not
related. You know.
not only that. I think he came out and said like he's not getting opponents, like people are not. But then
Really?
I'm baffled why the UFC is not doing the fights that they're calling out for. Like I mean, look, there's an asterisk to it, and I'll explain what. But before that, like let's talk about Ikram Aliskerov, right? Like I mean, from what we know, right? Obviously, him and Khamzat Chimaev have fought outside of the UFC, and if you go look at that fight, that was a hell of a fight, right? Obviously, Khamzat got the win. It was a knockout win. It was a nice uppercut, but it was a tough fight. And Khamzat's come out and openly said, like, this was the toughest fight I've ever had, right? He found it hard to take him down, all these kind of things, right? Now, there's a great narrative here as well, and like this goes back to the UFC always, doing more than just matchmaking, right? They like to weave in storylines. If he's able to get the win, if Alice Karov's able to secure the win, you can put all your money that they will do the Hamzat Alice Karov fight in the UFC. I can guarantee you that,
Most
right?
def.
Right. I mean, it's a high risk, low reward fight for Paulo Costa, who's risking his number 5 ranking to a unranked opponent, right? Who's a tough
Yeah.
opponent, right? We saw what he did to Philip Rowe. Yeah. So like, it's just
Maybe a part of his new deal, he was sort of not or forced to say, "Hey, right, we're going to give you this pay increase, but you better start taking the fights we want you to take."
yeah, it could be because he did sign a big multi-fight deal, right? With a higher incentive. So like maybe that. Um, Yeah, very interesting. So that's what I'm thinking, right? I'm thinking they're doing this for to set up the Hamzat Aliskerov fight. Now,
Yeah,
I also think in the meantime, don't be surprised if we get an announcement of a welterweight bout between one Kamaru Usman and Hamza Chimaev. Right? They both called each other out. They're both saying agreeing to it. That's a banger of a fight, right? Because that's the only other reason I could think of, and they'll probably try and put that in the Abu Dhabi card, right? Because the Abu Dhabi card
yep,
is most likely will
agreed.
headline Islam Makhachev, right? Imagine the
Yep,
co-main, Kamaru Usman and Amsat, right?
makes
Kamaru
sense.
and Islam are managed both by Ali Abdelaziz. So they're all on the
Yeah,
same team. So it makes a lot of sense. But we just got to wait and see. Unfortunately, it would be 1 year after Hamzat fought last in a very quick fight, right? We saw him make quick work of Kevin Holland, right? And
yep.
so we such a superstar. Well, I'm excited to see him in action. It's just unfortunate we haven't been able to see him yet.
Yeah, it's been a while. You hit the nail there. And so in your eyes, DJ, has the UFC done well with these announcements today? What's your
Absolutely,
sort of
absolutely, man.
overall thoughts on it?
Yeah, it was a solid card. One of the, I mean, they've just been like being solid with their pay-per-views. I actually rate this announced card higher than the UFC 288 card that we just witnessed. Maybe even slightly higher than the. Obviously, the main event will have no competition. Obviously, UFC put that one of the best main events. But in terms of overall card, I'd even say UFC 291 ranked higher than that. We obviously got other exciting fights in there.
Yep,
Stephen Thompson versus Michelle Pereira was announced. Man, that
huge.
is talk about stylistically
Oh,
exciting fight. That's it.
can't
Black Beast
wait.
is back. Yeah, I know, man. Black Beast is back, right? He's had a string of bad luck. He's back trying to get some wins. He's fighting Marcos de Lima. And then we got Michael Chiesa taking on your favorite fighter,
Oh,
Kevin Holland.
yeah,
And look, hey,
the Kung
this
Fu
is,
fighter,
yeah, and this
Trailblazer
one,
Holland.
and he's taking on someone with a lot of name value. He's taking on Michael Chiesa.
Yeah,
he's not a tough day out. So yeah,
yep, that's a big one.
sorry,
I
not an easy
agree.
day out. Yeah,
Yeah, no, you hit the nail. I think great announcement, surprise announcement, but I agree with you. Can't help but think it was, you know, perfect plan timing,
yeah,
so to speak.
plan timing. Yeah,
Can't have, Francis and PFL stealing too much of the headline because we know
yeah,
how negotiations went. By all
yeah.
reports were quite sour. But Dana even saying, "Oh, look, he's never going to be part of the UFC ever again." So, I
I
mean,
mean, from looking at the announcement, I don't think he needs to be part of the UFC ever again. Do you know what I mean? I mean,
hey,
you
never
know,
say
no
never. You know what
joke.
they say when you split from an employer, you want to try to end on a good note. Don't forget he
Yeah,
built his name with
yeah,
the
he did. He did.
UFC, but
And look, Dana White's actually a very forgiving person as well. Like we've seen him like make
yeah,
amends and these kind of things. We don't forget Conor McGregor and Dana White had a tussle. Remember when he leaked all those DMs? Do you know what I mean? Um, but hey,
I forgot. And he smashed the
let's
bus.
Yeah. Hey, don't forget. I know we spoke about UFC 291. They actually gave us some key fights from the UFC 292 card. They gave us a teaser, right? I don't know if this was prematurely announced, but um, the
Yes,
surging
can't forget.
superstar Sean O'Malley will be taking on the undisputed champion Aljamain Sterling for the main event for
Sugar
the
show.
featherweight the bantamweight title, right?
Yep.
Extremely exciting fight. You can guarantee that people will tune in for that.
Oh,
Sorry, because everyone wants to see Sean O'Malley fight for the title. Aljamain's built his own fan base now. He's been consistent. He's been
oh
dominant.
yeah.
He's been winning. He's been beating some big names. And then also the core main. Now, Wei Lee versus Amanda Lemos,
Yeah,
right? I
surprising.
understand Amanda's had a few wins, right? Don't get me wrong. She's in a 2-5 win streak. She beat Michelle Waterson and Marina Rodriguez. But I'm a bit
Mm.
surprised, like,
Yeah.
the Rose Namajunas, what's happening to her? I know Carla Esparza's out. Obviously, she's not. I don't think she's going to fight
No.
rematch Wei Lee, right? Yan Xiao Nan, like they were talking about this whole thing.
Yeah.
None of that came into fruition. So
Yeah. Exactly.
maybe the reason what's her name, Amanda Lemos is fighting Wei Lee is that maybe the UFC believes it's an easier fight for Wei Lee, and if she wins that, that perfectly lines up the old Chinese main event for the women's strawweight title. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah, like in terms of opponent, I was a bit surprised. But again, man,
agree.
you can never rule anyone out. Look at what Alexa Grasso did to Valentina Shevchenko. Look what
Yeah,
Julia Pena, what she did to Amanda Nunes. You know, these kind of things, so on and so forth. So like, yeah, you just can never count
yeah.
anyone out.
No,
Yeah,
you can't. But yeah, that's a huge load of news that we got today. I'm
absolutely. Yeah,
excited, fight fans, the big winners,
yeah,
CT and DJ on That's a Tap, right? We had to come on and give us our
yeah.
thoughts on this, and stay tuned for the next episode of the weekly roundup. Check the one out we dropped yesterday on the Haney Lomachenko big fight this
Yeah,
weekend, and then another UFC fight night, and then we'll be
yeah,
back to talk about it again next
yeah.
week. DJ,
Absolutely.
thanks again.
Peace.